Hello and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that gets you out of the bed in the morning with a cup of tea and talks a bit too excitedly to you about British politics.
It's Thursday, October the 10th. My name is Sam Cates of Sky News. In the background is my daughter making breakfast. And with me for the final time this week is Jack Blanchard of Politico. Good morning, Jack.
Good morning, Sam. It is a happy Thursday morning. I am D-Mob happy because I have taken the day off work and I am taking my wife out for the day. So you can look at me enviously down the Zoom screen today because as soon as we've finished recording this podcast, I am going to go out and see some paintings and catch a movie and go for lunch. What's your day look like?
Less like that. I am jealous. I mean, it does feel like this week has sort of gone into warp speed in politics. It's the critical decision moment for so many things for this government this week and next. And they're trying to reconcile everything that they promised all at once. Fear not, bosses, if you're listening. I'll be in the office shortly and we'll be pressing on because it is another busy day.
It is a busy day. There are two big things on the government's agenda today, Sam. One, Keir Starmer is hosting Volodymyr Zelenskyy and the new NATO chief, Mark Rutte, in Downing Street for big talks about the war in Ukraine. And on the media grid, the main thing the government wants to talk about today is the publication of its Employment Rights Bill, the thing that we've been promised in the first 100 days of a Labour government. That is here today, and we will talk about that as well. But of course, we should also spend some time in the podcast talking about the Tory party after the absolute jaw-dropper of a leadership contest result yesterday. James Cleverly is out of the race, having been the front runner, as we know, as I'm sure everyone listening to the podcast knows. So we better get into that as well, because my WhatsApps have not stopped buzzing about that since the result was announced yesterday afternoon. But let's kick off with Zelenskyy, shall we? So Zelenskyy is coming to Downing Street this morning. We're expecting him early in the morning in number 10, along with Mark Rutte, the former Netherlands Prime Minister, who is now the head of NATO. And they are here to discuss basically here to discuss war plans, Sam. And, you know, Zelenskyy is on a tour of capitals at the moment. After he's been to the UK, he's going straight on to Paris to meet Emmanuel Macron. After that, he's going to meet Giorgia Meloni in Rome, and he's going to see Olaf Scholz in Berlin, all in the next 24 hours. And this is part of the Ukrainian president's plan to roll the pitch for his victory plan. This is a very big moment for him. He is trying to sell his victory plan to Western leaders. The plan was that Zelenskyy was going to then meet with all of them and Joe Biden in Germany on Saturday to try and get this plan agreed and over the line at that meeting. Unfortunately for him, that meeting's now been cancelled because the hurricane in America is so bad that Biden's not gone, and therefore none of them are going, and so that meeting is going to have to be rescheduled. But nevertheless, Zelenskyy is here to try and get buy-in from all the most important Western leaders about his military plans for Ukraine, and that would include, in his view, the need for him to strike Russia deep in its own territory with Western-built missiles, which, as we know, has not yet been signed off by Western leaders.
The issue there, the sort of ability to use Storm Shadow and other missiles deep into Russian territory, has less been about the US reluctance to endorse that plan, I'm told by British sources, but more because there is a split amongst other NATO members and the US are unwilling to go ahead if NATO isn't united, which is why I suspect Zelenskyy is having to do a tour of multiple capitals. But that's where we'll see the Prime Minister today. But the big thing for this government is the new workers' rights package. Make Work Pay, which is being unveiled mostly by Johnny Reynolds, a little bit by Angela Rayner, who will pop up in a pool clip later, who was sort of the face of this package in the sort of big picture of this package. But the business secretary, Johnny Reynolds, has done most of the detail. Do you want to just run us through what the main things are in the bill?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of it. There's 28 new bits of regulation that are going to give more rights to workers and put more restrictions on businesses. And that is where basically the crux of the political argument is. They include loads more what they call day one rights for workers. This means that on your first day of your job, you will automatically qualify for things like paternity leave and unpaid parental leave. Previously, you had to be in a job for a certain amount of time to get those sorts of day one rights. Universal entitlement to sick pay from the first day of illness for employees employees. There is an ongoing conversation about probation and how long a probation period should be, and that is still up for consultation, but that is going to be a key part of this as well. People on 0 hours contracts will get guaranteed working hours if they want them. Firing and rehiring, that much maligned practice that some bosses do, and the one that Rishi Sunak was riffing on at Prime Minister's Questions yesterday when he was making jokes about Sue Gray, that will be banned in almost all circumstances. And people will get the right to flexible working. That will be a default where practical. A lot of this has been negotiated with the trade unions over months. In opposition, Labour was making this plan with the trade unions, and it was a really important plank of Labour's relationship with the unions, Sam, because lots of unions were a little bit unsure about Keir Starmer, frankly, when he came in as leader. They didn't see him as one of their own, and they could see that he was not nearly as taking not nearly as a left-wing approach as they would have liked. This package was always very much the sort of, I don't want to call it a sop to the unions, but like it was the message to the trade unions that they could stay on side with this this form of a Labour Party, and that there would be a big win for them if and when the Labour Party came to power. And here it is. It's a load of new rights for workers. I guess that the political row is that the business leaders are not happy with it at all.
No, but I think this package of workers' rights is going to end up aggravating everybody. But I've never been of the view that if you've upset everybody equally, that's a win. It's not true in journalism. It's not true in politics. Sometimes you just have upset everybody, and that's not a good thing. The Make Work Pay document had 60 different measures, and today we're only getting 28 of them. So there is still kind of 30 odd that you need to hear from. And what people in the heart of government keep stressing to me is that you have to read the fine print of absolutely every bit of this document really carefully, because it's not yet clear absolutely everything that they're talking about today is going to come in. So, for instance, some of the key measures in the bill will take at least 2 years to become law, some even longer, because so many bits of this package are subject to different forms and different lengths of consultation. Take the day one employment rights, for instance. There is a debate about how long this rather vague statutory probation period will last. The government's suggesting 9 months, but there's very little detail of what that looks like, and that's the thing that small business groups are focusing on today. And I just think there's quite a long way to go before we actually see these rights changing in practice. And 2 years is a very, very long time in politics. So just because we've got a bill doesn't mean the promises have been delivered.
I think that's true to a point, although I think if you talk to the trade union leaders, they are pretty happy here. They are basically pretty happy. That they will always, trade unions love to negotiate. They've been negotiating the fine detail of this for weeks and months, and as you rightly say, they will continue to negotiate and fight for the fine detail of aspects of it that are still up for consultation for months and indeed years ahead. But they are pretty happy with it. They think they're getting a lot of big wins here that they have been asking for years. And don't forget, the direction of travel on workers' rights has generally not been in their direction over the last 14 years, albeit with a, I suppose you'd call it a blip under Theresa May, where she did roll out extra rights for workers in some cases. The trade union bosses I've talked to feel like they are basically getting most of what they want here, and they're pretty happy with that. Should we talk about the budget as well, Sam? Because although the government are not talking about the budget today in public, they certainly are behind the scenes, and everyone else is talking about it in Whitehall too, and I suspect they will be every day now for the next 2 or 3 weeks as we head towards October the 30th. Lots of the newspapers today splash on a report by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS, the most respected sort of tax-focused think tank, which says that, yes, indeed, Rachel Reeves is going to need to find something like £25 billion in tax rises to avoid pushing us back into austerity. And of course, the government has publicly committed it is not going to push us back into austerity. And so for all the chat we've had this week about her changing the debt rules so that she can invest more in infrastructure, that is very much capital spending. That is a different thing to this. She still needs to find in significantly large tax rises just to stop day-to-day spending going down across government departments, and £25 billion is an absolute whopping amount of money. It's far more than George Osborne raised in 2010 in his austerity budget. It's far more than Gordon Brown raised when he came into power in 1997, and there is lots of speculation around today about how she is going to do that while maintaining Labour's commitment not to raise taxes on what Keir Starmer calls, quote unquote, working people, whoever they are.
This is a government that's hemmed in by three of its own commitments. First of all, it says there's going to be no return to austerity, although conveniently they've never defined what austerity is. Is it an actual reduction in budgets in pounds and pence? Is it not keeping budgets up with inflation? Whenever I interview Darren Jones, Chief Secretary of the Treasury, he jokes, it's simply no return to Tory austerity. And then you go, well, what's Tory austerity? And he goes, well, the kind of austerity the Tories introduced. So they're keeping that deliberately vague. But that's one promise. The next promise are the set of fiscal rules, which are clearly causing them pain. And yesterday we talked about how they were going to change some of the definitions. Rachel Reeves was potentially going to break her word, changing some of the definitions about debt. And that ended up coming up at PMQs when Rishi Sunak quoted the same stuff we were talking about on the podcast. And then the third promise is this no taxes on working people. I've been talking to cabinet teams this week who have been engaging with the Treasury, and amongst some of them, there is genuine shock about what they're being asked to do. So, as you say, yeah, there's a bit more money for investment projects, but that's over quite a long time frame, and it's not a huge amount of money. But what there isn't is any money at all to run government departments, which are already under strain because they're having to find cash to do those big public sector pay rises in many of the departments that were announced in July. Cabinet figures, aides and the like are really baffled about how they are going to deliver the promise of no austerity on the basis of the settlement that the Treasury is pushing for and requiring them to sign up to in the next week. They just don't know how it's going to happen. And they think that the positive message about more borrowing that you've heard about quite a lot over the last few days is totally out of kilter with reality, and their expectations are being raised too high. And they're worried that the budget and the spending review, which determines the budgets for 25-26, is just going to feel like a disappointment. So big warning bells across Whitehall for all of this stuff.
The attention for where Rachel Reeves is going to find this whopping amount of money is focusing now very much on national insurance payments and particularly national insurance payments made by employers. I'm not quite sure why we didn't all figure this out before, but it starts to make sense. If you've promised not to increase taxes on working people, you could stick to that promise, but increase taxes on businesses who also, of course, make national insurance contributions. And Keir Starmer very carefully did not rule that out. While asked about it a couple of times at PMQs yesterday, and government officials are not slapping it down as an idea, it could well be that employers find they're asked to make higher national insurance contributions while workers are not. If you increase that contribution by 1%, that would raise something like £8 or £9 billion a year. That is a significant amount of money, although it still doesn't fill this enormous black hole. But it's definitely something that is in the mix, and something else in the mix, and this also has the ring of truth about it, Sam, simply because I suspect no one will really understand it. And when I say no one, I also include myself here. Guardian has a story about Rachel Reeves considering national insurance employer pension contributions increases. Okay, you can imagine that one not exactly causing a storm on the doorstep, but were she to do so, Guardian reckons that could raise £17 billion, £17 billion. That is a vast amount of money for a tax change that, once again, you are slapping on businesses, so it is not clobbering quote-unquote working people, and I suspect it's the sort of tweak that is obscure enough in the way that it works that most people simply won't really know that it is happening, and that is exactly the sort of tax rise that Rachel Reeves would undoubtedly be looking for.
Up to a point, I can see massive dangers if you go for either bits of the employer section of national insurance. You've talked about two proposals and whether or not people will particularly notice if the taxes change around that. Now, there's long been discussion of raising employer national insurance at successive elections. That is often dubbed a jobs tax. It means that employers simply have less money to employ people and hits the labour market. So that has been a relatively loud attack by the Tories in the past. and governments have been scared to do that, scared to increase employer national insurance because of the pain that can cause. If you start to tax the pension contributions of businesses via the national insurance system, then that will presumably simply mean that less pension contribution goes to workers because some of it has to go on tax, right? And if there is any squeeze to people's pension contributions, then I think that there would be an incredible backlash to that for two reasons. First of all, they will stand accused of impoverishing people when they get to retirement, which is, quite a thing when there's already an allegation that they are going after pensioners with the winter fuel allowance cuts. And the second thing is, where does pension money sit? Pension money goes into big investment firms that are meant to provide the growth funds to, for instance, fund infrastructure in this country. If you kind of squeeze the amount of money because you're taxing it more, sort of pension fund contributions that would otherwise go and be recycled through the economy, then the government, which is desperate for pension funds and other funds to invest in all sorts of infrastructure in this country, will find that more difficult. So be careful what you wish for. Just because it's in the first instance complicated doesn't mean it doesn't have big consequences if we're talking about big sums, and there's no way escaping. There's no real way of hoodwinking the public with this stuff. They might not understand it on day one, but in time, people will explain the consequences of big tax moves. And, we are at a point where the tax burden is at an almost all-time high. So there will be a lot of squealing if they do that.
There you go, a stark warning for the Treasury from Sam Coates. Watch out, Rachel Reeves. Sam, we've got 2 minutes to talk about the Tories. It's a very traditional amount of time, but let's do it because it was an absolute sensation yesterday that James Cleverly did not make the final two, having been miles ahead in the voting the previous day. We have Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick now through to the final two. And it does seem, from reading the papers this morning and reading work of my Playbook colleagues this morning, that indeed some of James Cleverly's supporters decided to vote for other candidates, namely Robert Jenrick, to try and push Kemi Badenoch out of the race. They made a complete mess of it, and James Cleverly did not get enough votes from his own supporters to get through. Now, the James Cleverly's team are insisting they didn't coordinate this. They were telling their own supporters to vote for their man, but it would seem that some of them did not. The Times quotes has spoken to one of those supporters who says they're now feeling a bit sick. I'm not surprised. You should have voted for the person you wanted to win. We've had Grant Shapps, the campaign chairman for Cleverly, talking to Playbook, saying that he had very long conversations with colleagues telling them not to lend their votes to other candidates, but people thought they could second guess the results. He said it was a very, very bad idea. The Tory party is just hilarious, isn't it? Just when you thought that, they were becoming a slightly obscure thing that we wouldn't want to talk about, they managed to make their leadership contest an absolute jaw-dropper.
They've just ejected the candidate that urged them to be more normal because clearly they couldn't be more normal. One of the press officers for one of the leadership campaigns messaged me yesterday that just said, this result means that we'll be back in the middle of a leadership election in 2 years' time. Neither Kemi nor Robert appeal to the country. So it's not the gracious end to this phase of the contest that you'd think. Having two candidates on the right simply means that you're going to have a much more personality-focused contest because you're not talking about the direction of the party. And as a consequence, I would expect it to get quite a lot nastier. Indeed, some of the people in the remaining campaigns are saying that's exactly what they intend to do. So happy days as we go into the weekend. That means the weekend papers will be filled with a lot of bile and briefing.
And it means we can carry on talking about the Tories next week. All right, we better wrap it up because we promised we'd do it in 20 minutes. Sam, have a lovely weekend. I will see you on Monday morning.
See you then.